Hi there, my name is Nicole Poole. I do business as Lion and Poppy in Portland, Oregon. I am a painter, illustrator, calligrapher, and a maker of other things as well. I teach both in my studio as well as at Oregon Society of Artists. If you'd like to know more, please feel free to contact me, lionandpoppy@gmail.com, or you can see the variety of classes that I teach at osartists.org. At the end of this painting tutorial, you can see examples of the variety of classes that I will be teaching this fall term 2020. They are going to be offered both in the classroom with social distancing as well as online, so my students can choose how they would like to attend. Either way, we have a lot of fun, and I hope you can join us. Today we're going to be doing a watercolor illustration, and I will be playing with different amounts of water and adding different amounts of paint into that water so that we can start with more transparent, translucent layers and building forward, making the paint more opaque to create a layered illustration. Also, I will be using a Fudenosuke brush pen. This is my go-to pen for a lot of illustration work as well as lettering, and it is a great pen because it makes a variety of lines, from a hairline to a much thicker line, depending on the amount of pressure that I apply, and I really enjoy this variance of line in my work. It's also a great pen because you can watercolor over the top of it and it won't bleed out. So this video is sped up a bit, and that is so that it can finish in a timely manner. The video runs, the tutorial runs 40-45 minutes, and you can follow along with me and stop the video and catch up to where I am, or you can watch the whole thing through and then paint, or just watch it and enjoy it, have fun with it. Yeah, I'm Nicole Poole, and I hope you enjoy my painting tutorial illustration. Hi there, and welcome to our painted watercolor tutorial. We're doing a landscape today as our final project. So start with your paper saturated with water. Really get that water on there. And go back over areas you've already wet so you can ensure that it is incredibly saturated. We want it very wet so that when we drop our paint into the water, it really disperses across the page. And you can drop different amounts of paint in different places. You can see it's a little thicker in certain places than others. And I'm letting it run throughout the water. And I'm lifting the page and gently moving it about so the water can get into the area that I wet. So, and add more paint as needed. Better to add slowly into the water than too much color at once. So I'm just sort of letting it do its thing. I'm picking up any excess water. There's so much water on the page that it really gets lighter as it disperses in the water, so you feel free to keep adding more paint to the water. Watercolor tends to lighten as it dries anyhow. So I am sort of, if you pick up your page and move it off to one side, like tilt it in one direction, the paint tends to swirl that way, as you can see there. But when it dries, it looks different anyway, so the effect is sort of a surprise, as you can see there. And now it's dry, and once your painting is dry, you can come in and add a new line of water.
Again, make it quite thick, but follow that line you made that hits the sky there. So once you've got that in there nicely, it looks like I've tinted my water just with just a bit of brown, making some sort of shapes here for the landscape. It's okay to go into the sky a little, because essentially this is going to be a background for our drawing. So it's fine to be loose and free with it, because our lines later on are going to sort of go over the top. So as you can see, when I pull that line across, that's my horizon line, the paint bleeds into the water, which is what I want to happen. And makes these shapes along my horizon, which I'm going to turn into trees. So, and I'm coaxing the paint into the water and moving along and adding more paint as needed. This is going to be sort of a more cool season landscape, like fall or winter. Perhaps early spring, but I think more fall and winter. So once you have that, you can blot up some areas of paint or water if you'd like, but keep that horizon line fairly true. You want to keep that line. If you want areas lighter, just go ahead and blot up your watery paint. I'm also moving the page around to keep the paint going up into the water where I want it. So you can see I'm doing a combination of laying paint down, darkening the areas, as well as blotting up color. These palettes are great for just being able to clean out the paint with a paper towel and start with fresh paint. So I'm adding a bit of blue into the horizon line here. It's nice to add color that you see in one place in another place into the painting. Like if there's blue in the sky, it's nice to add it other places, sort of unexpected. You might not think to put blue into horizon line, or because it's separate from the blue of the sky, but it sort of pulls the eye around the painting. So I'm even defining my areas. Those are going to be trees there in the background. So if you were standing in one place and looking off in the distance towards the sky and across maybe a field or a plane of water, on the other side of that field or plane of water you might see trees, just sort of the shape of along the horizon. So I'm actually going to make water between me and the trees. So I'm using that same sort of brown with blues. Still working in the trees, but also starting to play into the water below. And when you're working a painting, it's fine to add color and blot up and add color again. It's just sort of what you call working a painting until it satisfies you. So I'm trying to put a crisp edge on some of those trees while leaving other parts of the trees soft. So using a fine brush, and putting enough water in the paint so it flows nicely off the brush, and you can practice with some lines on the side. I'm going to start adding lines into my trees. I think my hand's going to be fairly in the way, but for a minute, but you'll see I'm just making fine lines branching off in different directions, and it's okay if they split a little bit. Once my hand moves out of the way, you'll see. So I'm doing it fairly fine, because if I was looking across a field, those branches and tree trunks would be quite small within the whole large scope of the trees. So each of those mounds is not one tree, it's multiple trees coming up together in like a stand of trees. And so along the horizon here there are a number of stands of trees. So you just want to, when I was talking about using that paint so that it flows nicely off the brush, you want to add enough water that it flows, but not so much water that you're making watery lines. And those trees are dry when you start adding the branches in. If the shape of those trees was still wet when I added the branches in, it would just bleed out and I would not be able to make a fine branch line. So make sure that those trees are nice and dry. And if you want, on a spare paper, you can always practice your brush strokes and see if there's enough water in your paint that you can make a nice line. And if there's not enough water, you can add just a bit more until it is the right consistency. And if it's too much water, you can add some more paint into the water in your paint palette. But I often I sort of test the consistency of my paint either on a paper on the side or on my paper towel. I can sort of tell that I've loaded up too much paint or too much water, and I just keep adjusting until I know I can make the right sort of line. And these are sort of flowing in different directions. They're not straight up. You know, trees can live together, but sort of reach and stretch in different ways. It makes it your painting look more natural than if they were all standing the same way, standing at attention. I'm adding that horizon line back in a little more. I want to define it a little more and work into that area. I'm going to start, once I've got that separation between the trees in the background and the water that's coming forward, I'm going to start working into the water. And right now you can see I'm adding some more brown that's very watery, sort of in front of those clumps of trees to indicate a reflection of those stands of trees. And I'm moving my brush soft in some places, but in other places I'm sort of leaving a soft series of lines, sort of like how you might see water broken up. Now adding a bit of blue, like the blue of the sky, into the water, because also water reflects the sky. It's like a mirror. So it's reflecting the trees, but it's also reflecting the sky. And I don't need to make it as dark as the sky. I want the sky to be its own dramatic self as well as the trees in the background. I don't want what's happening in the water to compete. I want the water to be its own soft thing. So while I'm sort of softly putting in those shapes and adding a bit of blue, it's very loose and less defined. But as you can see, it's becoming its own thing. I'm going fairly slow here. If there's a line that you make that's too dark, just add some water on your brush and sort of scrub up the dark line and then blot it up, and it will leave a lighter line. If something is light in watercolor, you can always add more paint on top, but if it's dark, you can always lift up with water. So now I'm going to add some definition back into the sky. I want to sort of find some shapes within the water that's been diffused, and maybe, as I just did, make a sharper blue line. And now I'm just pulling down from the line I've made. Here I'm pulling the water straight down from that line that I made. I've decided that I want to make some rain falling in the background. I'm actually adding a bit of brown, sort of speaking to the ground below it, the browns that exist there. And sometimes on a gray day, you'll see darker colors in the sky, grays and even browns. So I'm pulling my paintbrush down fairly quickly at an angle and keeping that angle pretty consistent, meaning at the same angle to look like rain. And back to the blue, I'm just sort of making the shapes of clouds, and then after I make that sharp line, I'm pulling the paint away from it. And that way I have a cloud shape that's lighter while the sky is defined and darker around it. Sort of isolates a cloud. So just make your cloud, and then you can do sort of roundy tops and just let them be random. Sort of float your brush around and then pull the water down and out. It defines that cloud shape. As you can see, I'm sort of bouncing around my page, going different places, taking the color that's on my brush and just bringing it to different areas. Just little bits here and there. Keeps that color in your eye moving around the page because that color repeats, but randomly. So here I'm making a new cloud. Sort of flattish bottom. I'm going to add more color on the top, and now I'm going to pull it there we go, softening that edge, pulling, sort of scrubbing the paint away from that line. If you do that with a semi-dry brush or a brush with less water in it, it'll sort of soften more when it comes out. And if it's too wet, again, blot it up. And if it's too dry, add a little more water. But you can see I've just made a cloud shape by painting that shape and then pulling the water away from the top of the cloud or the bottom of the cloud. If you ever look far away at clouds when it's raining in one area, but maybe not where you're standing, you can see a sort of blurry area beneath a cloud where it just becomes diffused and soft. You can see from far away where rain is falling. And I didn't know that I was going to do that, but as I was painting the sky, my imagination said, maybe there's some rain falling from a cloud or two. Now I'm beginning with my illustration. And in this sort of autumn or winter scene, I thought of the geese that we see here in the Pacific Northwest. They like to come and hang out and do their geese things. We see geese around water a lot. We take a boat out on the river frequently, and we paddle by a lot of geese. So I thought I'd add some geese into my scene. So you can pencil your creatures in, or you can just begin to draw as I have here. It's fine to pencil in your birds, your geese. I'm using that Fudenosuke brush pen again because I like the variance of line. I like how it makes thin or thick lines depending on my pressure and where I want to apply pressure. In a way, it reminds me of when people used to draw more frequently in the old days with a ink pot and a nib, a special nib which people would write and draw with. When you use your pen, make sure all the paint is dry on your page. I know there's a lot of waiting for things to dry in this project, so sometimes while I'm waiting for one paper to dry, I will work on another one, so I'll have several backgrounds ready for me to draw upon. And seeing that, if it's a nice sunny day, which we're getting a lot of lately, you can put your page out in the sun and it will dry quicker. So now I'm adding some grasses and things. These are just sort of from my imagination, but also remind me of grasses that we can see growing around that sort of have these nice tops that sort of bloom up and out. So I put some details on my goose with the pen, and then the other goose, the first goose that I draw, I decided that I want to paint the details in, which I'll do later. So putting details on one goose, and then I'll paint over the top, and then on the other goose I will paint in those feather details. You'll see on the first goose I drew that there is a bit of grass going in front of the goose, but there's also grasses going behind the goose because I want them to look like they're standing in the grass. So I just put a little bit to indicate the grasses are in front of the geese as well as behind. So they're standing in the grass, which is more realistic. I am using my pencil for this goose, which is flying in the sky. I feel a little less confident in that moment to draw a flying geese as opposed to standing geese. So I'm using my pencil on my dried paper. The nice thing about using pencil on top of watercolor is you can erase it. Once you've got your lines down and you've refined what it is you're drawing, you could erase the lines you don't want. If I painted over those pencil lines, they would be trapped. And I couldn't erase them once I painted over them. But if I'm drawing with my pencil on top of dried paint, I can erase. So basically erase your pencil lines before you add paint, unless you don't mind your pencil lines. So I'm using that pressure for those feathery wings and sort of pulling up so it's thick at the beginning of my line and thins out. Here's the geese, has his foot tucked back. He's flying over the scene, and he's facing a different direction than the geese that are standing in the grasses. It's nice to have your creatures in different poses and facing different directions. So I'm penciling in a shape here because I've decided to put in a bush. And I'd like my twigs of my bush to go up right to that penciled edge I drew so that it has more of a defined shape. So I start with a thicker trunk and then add my finer branches. They get thinner as they go to the outward part of the bush. And this is just a fun thing to do. Sort of like what I painted in the background with those faraway trees, but because it's in the foreground, I'm going to be more careful with my definition. Just like when you see things up close, you can see the detail, and far away, you see shape and sort of evidence of little lines, but it's not sharp. It's not sharp like something that's right in front of you. And these geese are so close, it's like we're sitting in the grass right in front of them, observing them. And for some reason, they don't even mind. They're just letting us sit there and observe them, which is nice of them. So, yeah, start with your little trunk and just branch off different ways. One line leading off another, off another. You can add your twisty sort of wood lines in the trunk. Have fun with that. So, yeah, so put in some rocks and other grasses. So now I'm erasing my pencil line because once I put paint on top of all that, the pencil would be trapped. So I'm erasing that line so that I know it will not be trapped. Let yourself have a good time with this. So just keep adding in details. You can add grasses or flowers. So I've got rocks down there and different plants that I've added, and my rocks are different sizes, and some are closer to me in the foreground and some are a bit further away. And I've added little lines here and there in the rocks to indicate the shape has different angles. So sometimes when you're adding in your details and your lines, you can also just sort of touch your pen to the paper and leave indications of plants. It can just sort of be in the atmosphere around the plants, and there's so many grounded plant shapes all over the page that it's okay to put some random marks here and there that are not grounded. Just keeps it interesting, and your eye pulls it all together. But when you stop and look at details of things like that, it's nice to see that the surprise of something sort of standing on its own. So I just moved all around my page, adding in more and more details, and I sort of move from one side of the page to the other and back again, randomly all over. So once you get your pen lines in, you can paint on top of that pen because it is made to work with watercolor. It holds its line. So I'm mixing a little yellow with a bit of brown. I'm pretty much putting brown with many of my colors to keep it sort of earth toned and in that fall winter mood. So if I just had the bright yellow, it would be very bright yellow, even with a lot of water added. So again, I'm working the painting, so sometimes even going back up to the horizon line. Here I want to sort of tone the background. I'm putting that yellow in that has a bit of brown, but I'm also, putting more brown in certain areas and a little brighter yellow in certain areas, but I'm keeping that yellow fairly mixed with the brown. It makes a more sort of subdued, sort of autumny gold yellow instead of a bright, sunny summer yellow. I'm just painting around the geese. I'm doing it pretty lightly, fairly loosely, because I can go on the top of that soft watercolor background with darker watercolor. What I mean by darker is less water in it. So it looks, it sits on top. It sits on top of the lighter watercolor. So I'm sort of toning the back behind the grasses. I went around the geese. I wanted to isolate them. So just get that color in. Don't worry about it too much. Don't worry about it at all. Just have fun. And one of the things that's nice about adding these light backgrounds is that when we go over with paint that has less water, that brown really much darker just sit on top of the grasses. That just grounds it to the bottom of the page. Also, when plants sort of reach the ground and get thicker, there is a lot more darkness. If I was just to bring everything down, that yellow straight down to the bottom, it wouldn't look as finished as if I put darker colors that sort of solidified the base of things. It makes it darker, so it's sort of like having a heavy base on something so that it doesn't tip over. So as you can see, even with my green, I'm adding some brown in there so that I can keep that natural palette going, natural, wintry, autumny, autumnal palette. So I'm going to start mixing some colors a little richer, bringing that brown in. So it's not straight up red, it's more of a ruddy brown, brownish red. And start adding in lines around those grasses. And it doesn't have to match the grass exactly. In fact, it's more interesting if it's floating next to or near. And you can even have those brush lines going in totally different angles than the pen line. And you can just paint in the suggestion of other plants and grasses in the backgrounds. So, using your colors and skipping around the page here and there. I like to work different areas, and maybe as I'm working one area, I'll realize that I want to use the color I'm using in another area, or I'll see something that I want to add to another area, and I'll go back and work in the same place I was before, defining and making things pop out. But you can see I've added flowers and grasses in the background that I just created with my paintbrush. Nothing to do with going over actual pen lines, but still within that clump of grasses. It's nice because it's defining, the pen defines certain plants and certain parts of the landscape where my brush and paintbrush and paints just sort of become part of that, but it's not like the main player. They're supporting players. It's not, they're just there to stand amongst the other grasses and maybe not be the focal, but be part of the ensemble of grasses. So, you know, thicker details in here, being pretty loose about it, especially since I have my deliberate fine lines, so I can be more free with my watercolor. I'm building in, of course, darker paints to stand out and pop in the foreground. So I have softer plants in the background of those clumps of grasses and flowers, and then I have darker colors in the foreground and at the base, where I talked about grounding my plants to the bottom of the picture, so they didn't feel like they were floating away into the sky. So I'm deciding here, I think, to add some little berries or winter fruits to this bush. I just felt like it needed something. So I made the decision right then to add, I'm adding drops of water that I will then add color to. Taking and putting some brown into my blue, making a very brownish blue. I think I'm going to do, adding those little sort of winter berries onto the bush. Sort of randomly dotting that paint here and there. Sometimes I want to go back and pick up my paint so that it softens that dot, and sometimes it's too soft and I want to go back in and add more paint to that dot. That's just part of working a painting. Sometimes we take away and sometimes we add back again. So here I'm going to mix a little white with my blue and get sort of a almost robin's egg gray. It's a soft bluey gray. Paint in my rocks. And I'll also do some blotting up and just getting that gray in there. I will darken certain parts of the rocks so that it shows like the different slopes. When you look at a rock that has angles, there'll be lighter areas and there'll be areas that are more shadowed. Here I'm painting in my goose. This is exciting. So painting right on top of those goose lines and going back to my rocks. Maybe then I'll go back to my geese. I pop around, especially if I'm using a paint and the color is good. So now this goose, I think you might remember that I said that I'm going to paint in his feathery details. instead of drawing them in with the pen. One of the reasons I am doing both, of one goose drawing in the details of his feather with the pen and the other goose painting them is so that you could see how both of those are done, how you can do it both ways. So now I'm using a dark, it's almost a black, but it's a hair lighter. It has just the teeniest bit of white, but you can't really tell that. It's good. You could just use black and use enough water that it's not so dark. So I'm using that to put in the shadows on the rocks, indicating those different angles, as well as using it for my geese. Those geese have dark heads and necks. I'm going to paint very, very carefully around his eye. I don't want to paint just over the eye because then you can't see the eye. So I'm leaving a little teeny bit of white in a ring around his eye. And I'll do that with the same eye on this guy. So painting in their dark necks. And enough water that it's not so thick I can't blot some up if I want it. It's flowing quite nicely off my brush. I'm going around that eye very carefully so you can see it's white around it because I still want to see that eye. I'm blotting up to lighten. If it dries and it's not blotting up enough, just add more water onto the paper anywhere the paint is too thick. Sort of scrub it in with your paintbrush and then lift. So I'm adding those details, those painted details into this goose. Now I'm also adding a bit of a darker line under the wings of both birds. That defines the wing so I can see it as a separate thing from the body below. I don't want it just the same as the wing and the belly. So that shadow really adds a depth and isolates the wing from the rest of the body below it. So just painting in those feathered details. So when I'm painting in the lines that indicate the feathers, I don't have to fill the whole bird. Here I'm going to taper it down on his belly until there are none. I'm not filling his whole belly with them. I want to leave some of his belly bare. Painting in some browns in the belly and feet. And I get to sort of tone their bellies. And now for the fun part. I'm going to start on their beaks with that brown. Putting a little more darkness at the tip. And if that is too dark up towards the darkness of the head, you can just blot it up or add a little water and blot it up. But I kept it lighter except for that tip of their beak. So I'm going to start doing the same on my flying bird here. I'm adding some water first, going carefully around that eye. Now sort of dropping that color in. So I'm doing that a little differently than the birds below that I just painted in their necks. I'm dropping the water in. And now this is fairly thickly painted. Just going in those areas that I created with my pen. And also making my own new lines with the water. Now I'm pulling that color forward just with water, just taking water and pulling that color forward. And leaving some light areas at the edge of the wing. I'm mixing with that blue with a bit of white. Getting that beak painted in for my flying bird. Doing a little darker at the tip. Where are you flying to, goose? So now I'm going to start adding details to my flying goose, meaning those little indications of their feathers, which have those nice patterns on them. So just painting in my details. You've probably noticed that they're also different sizes and they move different directions, those indications of feather shapes. I'm not going to fill the whole bird. So now I'm getting some white, picking up white and keeping it light. And actually, if you can see, I just painted in the belly and took away part of his foot line because I thought it was too heavy. So I painted over that heavy line and left a thinner tucked foot line. So geese have those nice, they have a white belly, but they have those nice areas on the sides of their head that sort of swoop up with white. Now it's fun to add white detail on top of what has been dark detail. It really makes it pop. So I'm using that white and now accenting in certain areas where there might be light catching the wing. I'm indicating feathers also with the white. It's really fun adding white in over your darker marks. It makes it sort of sparkle. So adding that white detail into that area of the goose's top of their neck, the geese, the gooses, giving them that nice white spot, as well as adding those white details on top of the blue and the dark pen details, again to make them pop. And going back up to the goose on the top, making his marking a little more white. You always see, if I'm working on something, that I really bounce around. I'm never just done with one area. I sort of concentrate on an area, but I'm also aware of the overall relationship to the area I'm working on, which is why I may make changes as I go. Also, I find sometimes I like doing something, like I'll start adding a certain detail and really like it, so that I will continue that on in other places. I'm turning my palette and picking up some red, some bright red, and I'm not mixing that with brown because I just want to add these teeny tiny details of this incredibly vibrant red. And that is the one trick and surprise that I'm going to add to this painting color-wise, that makes it pop. And not only am I filling in areas that were penned in, but also just adding some red, dropping it in here and there. It's amazing what a teeny bit of a vibrant color will do to bring a piece alive. It just sort of makes it vibrate in a nice way. And the teeniest bit of red can actually do an amazing amount of brightening in what is an otherwise wintry scene. But I'm using it sparingly. So now I'm painting in final details and having fun working in the last wild plants, painting some of those little things into the foreground and adding more opaque whites into my yellow so it stands out. And that's it. You get to sign your painting and show it to people so they can enjoy what you've made. Always sign your work. I hope you've had fun painting with me today, and I hope you keep painting, and most of all, have fun.